Hi, I'm Matt Fisher. I'm a VR developer. I'm at VR Days here in the Netherlands, and I make stuff for like the Oculus Quest. So my main job is to optimize for Oculus Quest, like mobile games, because when you make like a VR game for like a really hardcore computer, it takes a lot of computing power to render like certain frames in a game. So my job is to optimize for it. So if that sounds like exciting work to you, become a VR developer. So I'm a remote developer. So let's see, I just came from Munich. I did a hackathon there this weekend related to VR and AR. I got third place. So with a team of 3 against teams of 6 and 7. So feel quite good about it. Yeah, I joined VR back in 2015, but I remember like when those first headsets came out, the Samsung like Gear VR, and they just had the phone in them, and looking back, they were terrible. But like the idea, I don't know, like I've always been a gamer, but I've also always been into stuff like fantasy. Like I like watching movies to have the escapism. Like I like these stories and narratives and being able to put myself into it. And I don't know people watching this if you've seen VR, but if you've never seen it, you really have to, because if you've ever enjoyed like just losing yourself in a movie or a video game, the second you put on VR, for some people, I mean, I don't know, not everyone says this, but for me, the second I put it on, I literally felt like I was in this new place. Like, my brain so quickly accepted that new reality. And for me, it was super exciting. Like, okay, as a kid, you know, you use your imagination to pretend that you're in these fantasy scenarios. In VR, if you become a good enough developer, you don't even need someone to, like, use their imagination. You can just show them this is now the reality you're in. And I think that's kind of exciting, you know. Well, you first have to know how to program. I think when you're first starting out, if you're not a software developer, you need to become a software developer. And that is a journey in itself. But once you've done that, then there's like the journey of being a VR and AR developer. And, you know, if you come from like web development or like, I don't know, enterprise, like that would be like Java. If you come from a place where the GUI looks two-dimensional, the hardest part about VR and AR is, and you want to do this early on in your life, because I think if you get stuck in the 2D design framework for too long, it'll be really hard to adjust your brain to the 3D. But like, yeah, it's a whole different paradigm to start thinking about design, not on like a paper like this, where it's like you can draw it with a pencil and paper, but actually when me and like my colleagues are discussing an AR idea, in the room we'll be using our hands in 3D to discuss like the interactions and stuff. Like we'll literally be like, okay, so there's object will be here, and then you'll grab it like this, and that's like, I guess that's the other big leap you have to take getting into VR and AR, is like being able to conceptualize how the programmatic elements can be manipulated in 3D rather than 2D, and how the data is sort of expressed in 3D and 2D. I don't have a lot of doubts about the future. I have a fairly optimistic view of the future of technology. A lot of people, I've noticed, the biggest trend amongst people who don't get into like VR, AR, or AI and computer vision, which is sort of my second love, is like they're in the tech industry, but they don't really believe in the progress of tech. And I think that just shows a lack of education on the history of technology. If you go back 5 years from any point, you'll see a lot of that. You know, it's only going to get better slowly, but if you look at like the actual progress of tech, it shoots up even faster. And you know, like 11 years ago, the iPhone did not exist. Pretty sure everyone in this room, or at least like half of them, have an iPhone. And yet 11 years ago, it didn't exist. when it came out, like touchscreen was only invented like a year before that. So I think if you're someone who is optimistic about the future of tech, that would help you a lot. And if you're not, maybe educate yourself on the history of it, and you'll start to see that its progress is quite inevitable. Yeah, I mean, everyone, is coming out with these boot camps, like how to do this or that. I taught myself how to program. But the biggest limitation, so I joined a company, I started learning how to program basically the exact same time I decided to get into VR and AR. So when I started, I didn't know how to program or do VR and AR. And I was able to progress in programming fairly well, but it wasn't until I joined a company that I even got my first headset. So I was using my phone for VR, and I was doing it on something called A-Frame. So I had to use my phone for mobile VR, and it wasn't very good. And I think back then, though, this was maybe 2 or 3 years ago, before the headsets were good. And I think now, the greatest value you could get out of an XR Bootcamp would be that you actually get to work with the equipment. And also, learning Unity and Unreal Engine is really hard by yourself. And I really didn't start getting good at that stuff until I was actually able to sit next to someone doing it. Those environments, the software itself is tricky to learn the user interface for. So, yeah, I think in life you can always teach yourself anything in any amount of time. But at the same time, as I was teaching myself, I would sit down with every week for an hour or two, I'd have an expert I knew in my city who I'd basically force them to sit with me for an hour or two and program next to me. And you can do that, but if you could, just have a concentrated dose of that, you'll probably move faster. I also was a lot younger, and I had the liberty of time to do the inefficient path. So that's my thoughts on that. Yeah. We need more people in the VR and AR industry. There's so many people now getting into tech and software development, and it makes sense because it's like the 2020s of being a lawyer, or being a stockbroker, or being a doctor. It's the new good job, and if you want that in life, that's definitely good. That's a good reason, but I find a lot of people in life also deep down have a want to do something more artistic, and at least in VR and AR you get to do more of that as opposed to some other types of software development. So if you find yourself being a little more of an artistic person, a little more of a creative type, a designer, yeah, have the confidence in yourself that you could do VR and AR instead of normal development. And I got to tell you, if it doesn't work out and you can't even find a job in VR and AR, if you apply for a job for other stuff, they'll be super impressed that you even know how to do that stuff. The skills are fairly transferable. Programming's programming. So that's my final thoughts.